A few weeks ago I put a message out to people who follow my channel to say that I fancy doing something a little bit different. I fancy doing some Ask Me Anything videos, and I was quite overwhelmed by the amount of people that responded, the amount of questions that were asked. There were far too many questions to put into a single video, so I promised I would come back with a follow-on video to that first one. So this is part 2. Hi folks, I'm Craig Taylor, and if you're interested in improving your bushcraft and outdoor skills through some simple, no-nonsense videos, then please consider subscribing to my channel. Cheers. First question comes from Anthony Altieri. Now Anthony asked a couple of questions in the first, in fact Anthony asked a lot of questions, so I answered a few of them in the first video and I'm following up in this video as promised. Anthony asks, which bushcraft skill do I find that I use most in daily life, and does that surprise me? And it's a really good question. It got me thinking, and every time I think about it I come up with a different answer, so let's see what the roulette wheel brings up this time. But it's interesting because Anthony phrased the question, which bushcraft skill do you use most in daily life? But I'm wondering if you could flip that. Which daily life skill do I use the most in bushcraft? Because I think that the question is equally valid if it's asked both ways. And I would have to say, see where the roulette wheel lands this time, I'd have to say it's probably the principle that I use a lot in my day job, which is, what's the least I can do for you? That sounds really lazy, doesn't it? It sounds really lazy, incredibly lazy. I work in the technology field, in the learning technology field, and quite often people want incredibly extravagant, high-tech, over-engineered solutions to fix what's potentially a very simple problem, because we use the word technology and therefore we assume it has to be high technology, we assume it has to be a complicated, involved result, and sometimes it does, and often it doesn't. So I often approach things with the mantra about what's the least that I need to do to solve your problem. Is it a high-tech solution, or is it actually something quite quick and agile and low cost that you could potentially do yourself with a little bit of coaching from myself? And I think that adage of what's the least I can do for you, what's the least I have to do to solve this problem, is a tenet that I transfers through to bushcraft, and equally works the other way as well, Anthony. You know, I look at incredibly, if we take pot hangers for example, I see some incredibly well crafted and complex and complicated and over engineered pot hanger solutions out there, when often a stake driven into the ground at a 45-degree angle with a Y fork holding it up over the fire would suffice. So I think that principle of what's the least that's needed to solve this problem is a principle that I use in the day job and also when I'm bushcrafting. Hope that answers your question, Anthony. I know you get outside quite a lot, Anthony, and I also know you through my day job as well, so I guess I'm going to fire the question back at you. Let me know in the reply below, what outdoorsy type skill do you use most, or do you see being used in your day job, and vice versa as well? Answer it any way that you want to. I certainly did. Good question, Anthony. Next up, I've got a question here from Ken Schaefer, and Ken asks, apart from navigation, what skill did I learn from being in the army that's helped me most from a bushcrafting perspective? Another good question, Ken. I know that Ken has a military background as well as an interest in the outdoors, so I can see the commonality of him asking that question. I had to think about this yesterday whilst I was sat out in the garden in preparation for this video, and I would say the single biggest skill, and I'm going to use the word skill, but equally I could equally be argued out of using the word skill. The single biggest skill is, or that the army taught me that's been useful for bushcraft, is just being outdoors. That's just a statement, isn't it? That's not a skill. What I mean by that is just being able to look after yourself outdoors, being able to operate outdoors, that confidence that it brings you, that ability to to know how to dress appropriately, to know and be confident that being a little bit wet and a little bit cold, while sometimes the precursor to more serious things, isn't the end of the world. And that as long as we, pay attention to certain principles of looking after ourselves in inclement weather, be it heat related or cold related, we're still able to perform, we're still able to push through that. Being hot or cold, again with some sensible parameters put in place, isn't the end of the world. So yeah, I think it's quite a boring answer, isn't it? Sorry, Ken, but I just think that being in the army, being in the military full stop, but I was in the army, you spend an incredible amount of time outdoors. You spend an incredible amount of time outdoors in weather conditions and situations that you probably wouldn't choose to be in if you weren't being made to be in them. And that brings with it an underlying skill set of how to look after yourself, how to dress, how to behave, how to look after your kit, how to administrate yourself in the outdoors, in potentially austere conditions, that when you come then to transfer that to bushcrafting, where nobody's shouting at you, you're not really up against the clock as such, where everything is just a little bit more relaxed and sedate and calm, that experience of being outdoors then just multiplies in terms of its benefit that it can bring when it comes to bushcrafting. So it's not really a skill, it's or is it? I'll leave it up to you. Let me know. Do you think it's a skill? Let me know in the comments below. Is just being comfortable and capable and confident outdoors, is that a skill, or is it just a way of life? Let me know. And again, from your perspective, because I know you've got a military background, what skill set do you find that you've picked up in your time in the military has been the most use to you in this new, more calmer outdoors world that we inhabit? I look forward to hearing your answer in the comments below, Ken. Next up, we've got a question from Donald Taylor, and quite ironically, because of what I've just mentioned previously in this video, Donald is someone that I know more through my day job in the learning technology world than I do through the non-day job, the outdoorsy side of life. So it was good to see somebody that's purely day job related crop up and ask a question. So thank you for doing that, Donald. He asked a couple of questions, one of which centered around anything that I could suggest in terms of wayfinding in cities and towns and built up areas. It was a good question, because I guess my channel is known for, or I'd like to think it's known for, what I would call traditional, conventional map reading and land navigation, map, compass, that type of being in wilderness type areas. But of course there's a lot that we can take from being in urban areas, built up areas, cities, towns, villages, hamlets, that type of thing as well. Now, I do not profess to have anywhere near the amount of skill set and knowledge and confidence in terms of natural navigation in built up areas than I do with conventional navigation in more rural and wilderness areas. So I am, because it would be remiss of me not to, I'm going to direct your attention to a very, very well thumbed copy of Tristan Gooley's The Walker's Guide to Outdoor Clues and Signs. Now, Donald, I recommended only a few weeks ago one of Tristan's books, How to Read Water. I'm not sure if you've received that yet, but same author, same guy, purely looking at natural navigation, touches on water in here, but it's a small section of the book as opposed to what I've suggested to you, which is the whole book. So a few things that I would suggest to anybody that's wandering around, particularly in this lockdown, particularly where we may not be able to go very far, if we're following advice and we're living a particularly built up area, there's some things that you could look for on your daily walks and start to build up a picture of and start to sanity check yourself. Now, I should say that these are not hard and fast rules. There will be exceptions to what I'm about to say now, but I would like to bet that you would definitely start to see a pattern where these may not be hard and fast rules, but you probably see them start to occur more often than the rules are broken. So let me dive into a few of them in detail. Satellite dishes. I'm talking predominantly in the UK here. Satellite dishes. Most, in fact, I think all, if not most, of the UK's satellite programmes are broadcast through a single provider. To that end, as the Earth rotates and moves around, the satellite stays over a specific spot on the Earth's surface, which means that we can watch satellite TV any time of the day or night. That means that the satellite dishes don't need to move to track the TV. So the next time you see a satellite dish and you've got a compass with you, because why wouldn't you be carrying a compass around with you on lockdown, stand underneath it or as close to it as you can get, and I would like to hazard a guess, unless it's pointing the wrong way, it's pointing in broadly a southeast direction. Next time you see the next satellite dish, I bet it's pointing in the same direction. In fact, I would like to hazard a guess that 99.9%. Crikey, whatever that is, it's close and it's noisy. And it's moving, so hopefully it'll move out of microphone shot. I'm going to carry on talking. 99.9% I imagine of the satellite, it's annoying me, the satellite dishes you see will be pointing in a southeasterly direction. So there's a handy little tip. Built up areas in the UK, unless the satellite dish is misaligned, I bet it's pointing southeast. If you know that that dish, dear God, if you know that that dish is pointing in a southeast direction, then you can work out the cardinal points of the compass from that satellite dish. So there's a really simple one because they're easy to spot, everybody knows what they look like, and if you can start to build up confidence in that pattern, that it's pointing southeast, then you've got yourself a handy little wayfinding tip. But it's not the only one, it's not the only simple technique that you can use in built up areas. I'm talking predominantly about the UK here, however I would suggest it works the same anywhere in the Northern Hemisphere. But look at roofs. If you can get close to a building with a relatively low roof that you can see, and I'm going to use my roof and my neighbour's roofs as an example here, the south facing side of that roof has a lot of lichen on it and no moss. The north facing part of that roof, bearing in mind that it's the same roof, it's literally just one side of the roof or the other, has hardly any lichen on it and a lot more moss on the north facing side. So again, if you can start to validate that yourself as you're out and about walking around getting your daily exercise on lockdown, if you can validate that, you can start to build up a sense of confidence that in your area and maybe a wider area that you start to see that pattern. Even if there's no satellite dishes around, you can start to get a sense of what you're seeing on the roofs equating to a cardinal point of the compass. If the house has got lichen on one side of the roof, moss on the other, and it's got a satellite dish fitted, you know, it basically, you're probably looking at a bloody great big compass that you can work other directions out from that. So there's another nice simple one there. Moving on to the final tip that I'm going to suggest here, and there's a lot more in terms of wayfinding in built-up areas, but another one that is, I was loath as to whether to include this or not, because I've not seen evidence of this in a modern build perspective, but lots of evidence of it in older build perspectives. I'm talking about churches. If you look at a church, an older church, I'm not necessarily talking about a modern brick traditional, modern looking type of church. I'm talking about the sort of churches you find out in villages and out in rural areas, older churches, much older churches. You will probably find that they are more or less built, more or less on an east-west alignment, with the altar being at the eastern end and the spire, the tower, being on the western end, more or less. There's sometimes a slight variation on that, but if we're just talking about broad line cardinal points of the compass, pretty much east to west alignment, you'll probably find that the church has a lot more ground on the southern side of the church than it does on the northern side. And that's because, again, I'm harking back a long time now, the southern side of the church tended to be where people wanted to be buried. So the southern side of the church, more real estate for a graveyard. Over time, as graveyards filled up and people didn't stop dying, the east and west sides of that churchland were filled up, and finally the northern side was filled up. North was never traditionally a place where people tended to be buried. They tended to be people that had been ostracised or reserved for people that had committed suicide. So, where was I going with that? So, the older graves, go around a churchyard, an old churchyard, I bet you will find that the older dated graves are on the south side of the church, then the east-west, then the northern side will probably be the more recent gravestones, because of the geographic spread, the alignment around the church, how people preferred to be buried. Again, I don't know if that works with very modern churches that you find cropping up in city centres and that kind of more really urban areas, but certainly your older traditional churches, you've got a mental picture of what I'm talking about now, haven't you? East-west alignment, the altar at the eastern end, the higher aspect of the church at the west end. You'll also often find that the door access to the church is on the southern side of the church at the western end. So people would walk through on the southern side, they would turn, look down the church to the altar and find a place to sit facing the altar, rather than coming to the church and turn their back on the altar to find somewhere to sit. Again, broad brush generalisations here. However, whenever I've seen rural type churches, older churches, every single one that I've been in a position to sort of take a compass out, they've all fitted that rule perfectly. So another little tip there, if you're slightly in a more rural area and you've got some older churches around, test that theory out as well. I've prattled on quite a bit there, Donald. Hopefully you're still watching. Hopefully you're still with us. But yeah, test those things out for yourselves. Satellite dishes, roofs and what you see growing on the roofs. And if you're fortunate enough to be anywhere near any old churches, just test that principle out, see if it works for you. Let me know in the comments below. The church thing might take a little while to get to. It may not, but certainly let me know in the comments below next time you've gone out and about for a walk, what you've noticed growing on people's roofs in terms of direction of in which those roofs are facing from a cardinal compass point directive, and all direction, and also the satellite dish one. That's quite a modern one, the satellite dish, but it's absolutely founded in logic that it needs to be pointing in a specific direction to pick that signal up. Let me know in the comments below. Good question. Thanks for asking it, Donald. Moving on to a question from Stephen Ward. This time navigation related again, but what I would consider something closer to my comfort zone around navigation. And it was any tips that I had on night navigation, particularly in low visibility, cloud cover low visibility. I'm going to link to a video up in the top right hand corner of your screen now up here. I'm linking to a video in which I actually go out and do a night navigation route at night in the dark and talk through what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. So go and have a look at that. But to answer your question in this video, what are my tips? My tips are, or my observation would be, nothing really changes when it comes to navigating at night. Conventional signs don't change. The ground doesn't change its shape. There isn't some weird magnetic anomaly that makes your compass behave any differently. The principles of distance, speed and time and pacing are still as sound at night as they are during the daytime. Admittedly, your pace may change and your timing may change. It probably will. But the principles of how distance, speed and time all work together are exactly the same at night time as they are during the daytime. I guess what I'm saying is, broadly speaking, there is no difference to navigating at night than there is during the daytime. From a theoretical perspective, from a practical perspective, the biggest tip I would give would be slow down. Make your navigation legs shorter than what you might during the day. During the day, a navigation leg of 400 metres to the point where a river enters or leaves a wood line in good weather conditions, in good visibility, may be a perfectly reasonable navigation leg to undertake. At night, it may not. At night, you may need to break it down into chunks of 20, 25 metres, maybe 50 metres, maybe inching, literally inching forward to break that leg down into much smaller, multiples of much smaller legs. Again, when navigating at night, get used to how to look at things. That sounds like a weird, surely you just point your head in that direction, focus your eyes and you're away. But at night that doesn't work because of the way that the cones and the rods work in our eyes. It's all mentioned in this video that I referred to earlier on. You have to look at things slightly offset. I tend to look at them and then slightly, I'm looking at the lens now, I tend to look up and slightly right. And that helps me to form the shape of what I'm looking at. And most people, you will find, will have to look at things at night slightly offset. So I don't want to palm your question off. Hope that's given you an overarching idea about tips for navigating at night. But I would strongly suggest going to have a look at that night navigation video, because it's a video purely dedicated to some hints, tips, some reassurances, and some good old dollop of common sense when it comes to navigating at night. But it's a good question. Thanks for asking it. Finally, we come to a question from Gavin Wood. Gavin asked quite a detailed question. The bearing it down to the bare bones though was, are there any hints or tips that I would offer in terms of staying warm and dry in cold and wet conditions? Gavin then went on to explain that he's got some history of hypothermic casualties. So he mentions hypothermia, but specifically the question was how to look after yourself in cold and wet conditions, how to stay warm and dry when it's cold and wet. Wow, it's a great question. It's a question that's you could dedicate a YouTube channel to that subject and probably never run out of things to say. So it's a very deep and broad subject. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some tips, and I'm going to point you in the direction of where you could start to go down that rabbit hole. Paul Kirtley, who regular viewers of mine will know that I'm a big fan of Paul, big follower. He speaks a lot of sense, incredibly skilled and knowledgeable and good at getting it across. Has written some great articles, and I'm going to link to one. I can't link to it in the video, but I'm going to link to it below this video in the YouTube description. He talks about the methods of heat loss. My first tip would be become incredibly familiar with the methods of heat loss. Radiation, convection, conduction, evaporation, respiration. Get familiar with those 5 methods of heat loss. Once you understand the methods of heat loss, once you understand how your body is being robbed of heat, you're infinitely better positioned to understand how to stop it being robbed of heat. So I guess the first tip is understand the root cause of the problem first. Radiation, convection, conduction, evaporation, respiration. Understand those 5. Understand how in the outdoors those 5 can occur and how physiologically they rob you of heat. Once you've got those down to a T, you understand the problem, you understand the root cause, you can do something about it then. So I'm going to link to that article. I would suggest going and having a really good read of that, taking notes, going back, revisiting that over and over again, and then figuring out what do you do now to combat those, if you can combat all of them. The respirations is an interesting one, and what you could do better to combat them. I don't just want to point you off in that direction though, although it would be the best starting point, to be honest. Let me leave you with this tip. If I was to boil down what's quite a complex and incredibly important and complex subject, if I was to boil it down, which is always a recipe for disaster, into a single tip, I would say this. Do everything that you can to keep your clothing. Right, let's make an assumption first. Let's assume that you are dressed appropriately for the conditions. Let's not assume that you're wandering around in shorts and t-shirt in cold, wet, windy conditions or freezing cold conditions. Let's not assume you have all of your winter gear on in the equatorial regions or in the jungle or something like that. Let's just assume that there's a bare baseline of common sense being applied, which I'm sure there is, Gavin. My biggest tip would be do everything that you can to keep that clothing dry, to stop it from getting wet. water conducts heat away from the body. I want to say it's 25 times faster. Don't quote me on that. Water conducts heat away from the body incredibly much more quickly than dry clothing does. So keep your clothing dry. Whether that's dry from the outside in, rain, sleet, snow, hail, that type of thing, or whether it's keeping your clothing dry from the inside out, i.e. sweat and perspiration. If you can keep your clothing dry, assuming you're wearing the right clothing, you have taken more than a step towards ensuring that you can stay warm and dry in cold, wet conditions. Hopefully I've not tiptoed around that answer, Gavin. Let me know in the comments below if you wanted more. Let me know once you've gone and read that article. Come back down here and tell me what one single thing, even if it's just, pick one thing that you've learned from that article. Let me know in the comments below. As I say, it's a life-saving question / answer, and I don't want to, I want to give you the best possible starting point to get answers for yourself, which will be going to read that article, go down the rabbit hole with Paul's articles, and then overarchingly keep your clothing dry when and wherever possible, from the outside in or the inside out. If you've not yet seen part 1 of this Ask Me Anything series, then check the video out that's appearing down in the bottom right hand corner of your screen now. And if you're not yet a subscriber, then why not click on that red subscribe button and do something about it. I'll see you very soon. Take care. Cheers.